Can Israel thwart Iran's nuclear program? It's attacked Iranian military and nuclear sites, claiming Iran was close to producing a nuclear weapon. Tehran says it's a declaration of war. So how far will it go with its response? And what does it all mean for its nuclear ambitions? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Israel hits Iran's nuclear facilities, kills several of the country's top nuclear scientists, along with the head of the Revolutionary Guard and a number of military leaders, and damaging residential areas in Tehran. Iran retaliated by sending hundreds of armed drones towards Israel. Israel says it had intelligence showing that Iran's nuclear program was, quote, developing beyond the point of return. But the IAEA says striking nuclear facilities is illegal under international law, as well as dangerous. Is it really possible for Israel to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities? And is it risking a nuclear disaster by trying? We put all of this to our guests. First, though, Imogen Kimber has more about what happened.
Israeli missiles rained down on Tehran, on nuclear facilities, on the homes of senior Iranian leaders. Revolutionary Guard Commander General Hossein Salami killed, along with other senior military leaders and nuclear scientists. Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, addressed the nation in a statement.
To the great Iranian nation, this morning at dawn, the Zionist regime unleashed its vile and blood-stained hand in our beloved country, revealing its wicked nature even more by striking residential areas. This regime must await severe punishment.
Iran responded with drone strikes on Israel, although it's not clear how many hit their targets. Israel called its strike preemptive and necessary to stop what it claims is an Iranian project to develop a nuclear weapon, something Tehran denies.
We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program.
He also said more attacks will continue for as many days as it takes. The strike comes after the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, adopted a resolution accusing Iran of breaching its nuclear non-proliferation obligations for the first time in nearly 20 years, by failing to provide answers to its questions about uranium enrichment. Iran responded with what it called countermeasures, saying it would open a third enrichment site that it has already built. The IAEA has condemned Israel's attack, calling it deeply concerning.
I have repeatedly stated that nuclear facilities must never be attacked, regardless of the context or circumstances, as it could harm both people and the environment. Such attacks have serious implications for nuclear safety, security and safeguards, as well as regional and international peace and security.
Grossi also said hitting nuclear sites is against international law, although Israel has done so before, including killing nuclear scientists. Iran has long maintained it is not developing nuclear weapons, and its program is peaceful. The US has said it wasn't involved in the attacks, but would defend Israel. Talks are due to take place between the US and Iran in Oman, with the aim of reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. But many are wondering what they can now achieve, whether the hostilities between Iran and Israel will escalate, and what the risk is of targeting nuclear sites. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests now. In London, Ellie Garan is Deputy Head of the Middle East and North Africa Program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. In Washington, D.C., Ali Vaez is Iran Project Director at International Crisis Group. And in London, Samuel Romani is Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute and CEO of Pangea Geopolitical Risk, a London-based consultancy. Samuel, I'll go to you first because I'd like to tap into that expertise. I think intuitively, all of us and all our viewers can understand that Israel is striking Iranian nuclear facilities in order to achieve its stated goal of, quote, thwarting Iran's nuclear program. But I'd like us to establish a more granular definition and understanding of what it means to go after a nuclear program. From a tactical standpoint, how do you achieve that? What do you have to target, and how do you do that?
Well, I mean, it's not surprising that Natanz was under attack as a primary locus of Iran's nuclear enrichment. I mean, the IAEA basically has singled it out as a facility where it seems as if their inspectors were not able to access fully, and there were also concerns that it could be the locus point for their prediction of Iran's potential ability to produce 9 nuclear bombs. And this attack was by no means the first from the Israelis. It was a major cyber attack on Natanz that dates back to 2010. There was the smuggling of explosives into the plant previously. So this has always been a high-value target. But the most important thing to emphasize is that Iran has got many, many sites where it engages in uranium enrichment. And when I've been looking at the Israeli media this morning, there's been a lot of questions as to why this current raid did not also combine attacks on Fordow, and whether Fordow would also follow up soon, because if you don't target that, you're also leaving a site on the table where there's 60% uranium enrichment that's there. So this is a first step towards disarming Iran's enriched uranium capacity and derailing Iran's nuclear program, but it's the first of many steps if Israel actually wants to escalate in this manner.
I'll push you a little bit more on that question. I'm trying to establish what constitutes military success and military failure from Israel's standpoint. They attacked Natanz, which is the primary and the main, as I understand it, uranium enrichment site in Iran. But intuitively, we also all understand that just dropping bombs on an enrichment site can be reckless and dangerous. So again, tactically, what does Israel have to do from its standpoint?
Well, I think that Israel has had some difficulty in terms of reconciling its maximalist ambitions here with what can actually be achieved militarily on the ground. And it's very similar to the problem that they've had in Gaza, right, where they've talked about obliterating Hamas, while having to acknowledge that Hamas is a political movement and its ideology and a lot of its tenets are ingrained in large swathes of the society that's locally there. So Israel has once again, I think, set itself out with an unrealistic target of completely demilitarizing or liquidating Iran's nuclear potential. That being said, I think that Netanyahu will probably be able to claim victory with a few more attacks of this kind. So not just Natanz, but also Fordow and a bunch of the other nuclear reactor sites being targeted, and perhaps more high-profile assassinations. I mean, I think taking out Hossein Salami, who was a veteran of the IRGC from the Iran-Iraq War of 1980, and who led such a powerful rally and did a lot of the public anti-Israeli diatribes after Soleimani's death, the big rally against the killing of children in Gaza, for example, and Bagheri, the head of the armed forces, are big scalps. But there are probably more of those kind of targeted assassinations to come. So I think that Israel will just degrade Iran's nuclear potential without eviscerating it and engage in targeted assassinations, and then eventually declare some kind of a victory, like it's done qualifiedly against Hamas and Hezbollah.
Ellie, can a nuclear program the size of Iran's actually be destroyed? Because Israel has claimed success and victory in today's, or in the raids that it conducted in the last few hours, and said there are probably days of raids left.
Sure. So let me just start by adding to your previous guest's point on an interlinked point to your question. So one of the reasons why Israel hasn't gone after Fordow in this first round is that these are deeply buried facilities that are likely to require...
Fordow is an enrichment site, yes?
Yes, that will require U.S. assistance by most estimates. So, the estimate is that at some point, the Netanyahu government is hoping to actively drag in the United States to use its bunker buster bombs to attack Fordow. You also have Bushehr, for example, where there's active cooperation between Russia and Iran. So the Russia factor is also a degree of limitation on how far Israel can go for now. The Israelis have demonstrated a great tactical ability to start conflicts, and we've seen it against non-state actors like Hamas and Houthis and Hezbollah, but they haven't really managed to show strategic success in closing wars. And I think this will be a deep consideration for the United States as they weigh whether or not they engage more directly and overtly with Israel going forward. And, to most estimates that I have seen, to really destroy the infrastructure of Iran's nuclear program, you would need a certain degree of active military presence on the ground, of the type that really only the United States can provide. And it seems very far-fetched to think that President Trump, who has run on a platform promising not to engage US personnel in another endless war, would commit to this. And this is going to be the key question if really Israel is looking to destroy Iranian nuclear infrastructure. And I'll just end by saying, yes, the Israelis have assassinated over the years and in this latest strike Iranian top nuclear scientists, but Iran now has harnessed the nuclear knowledge and spread it quite wide amongst its younger generation of nuclear scientists to an extent that I think it's very hard to think that it can bomb away this knowledge now.
Okay, Ellie, let's bring you in. So both Samuel and Ellie have expressed considerable skepticism as to whether it's even possible to achieve Israel's stated goal. I think you agree with this because you told our team before the show that dismantling a nuclear program simply doesn't work. Explain why.
Well, it's precisely because of the reason Ellie just alluded to, which is the fact that Iran has acquired the knowledge and has mastered the art of enrichment. And that cannot be bombed away or taken away. Iran can always reconstitute its nuclear program because it just has learned how to do this. And in fact, if Iran came very close to the verge of nuclear weapons but didn't cross the Rubicon to develop nuclear weapons, it was primarily because the political decision was not made. And Israel, by attacking Iran on its own territory, is basically signaling to Iran that its regional deterrence didn't protect Iran, its conventional deterrence didn't protect Iran, and so Iran is left only with the option of now trying to actually weaponize the knowledge that it has on the nuclear front. So I think this is more likely to backfire than actually to help Israel meet its strategic objectives.
Samuel, what lessons do you learn from what we know so far at the time that we're recording this program? What lessons have you learned about the strikes that Israel has conducted in Iran?
Well, yes. I think that the Israelis can claim that they have achieved substantial success in terms of targeting Natanz nuclear facility. The Iranians are acknowledging damage, but they're not acknowledging radioactive leaking, and that's kind of the only as far as it goes. But basically, yes, I want to really drill down on Ellie and Ali's points, which are 100% correct. This is a very, very uphill struggle for the Israelis to be able to take this over. There's severe fortifications even around Natanz and also other places. Like we think the lesson from the Taliban 2 facility in Parchin back in October, where they struck and they destroyed some nuclear weapons research, but ultimately didn't do long-term damage to the facilities, is a lesson and a warning shot to come, that this may require many strikes on the same sites in order to decapitate them. Moreover, I also think that the Israelis are working maybe in consult and in consultation with the United States, but not with the full backing of the U.S. And I think that, for example, the Boeing 707 refueling planes that Israel has are somewhat aging and they're not really ideally suited for this type of attack. More aerial support from the Americans would probably be needed to make this operation successful. And the Americans are unwilling to provide that. And they probably want eventually this to dial down and to use these strikes as a way to put pressure on Iran at the bargaining table. So I think that Israel has gotten some qualified tactical successes, but the fortifications, the lack of U.S. support, and just the impossibility of the task makes it really hard for Israel to claim a strategic victory now or any time in the foreseeable future.
Could Israel have conducted these strikes with this outcome and this result 6 months or even or a year ago? Or is this a result of having previously weakened Iran's air defenses?
Well, I think that this is a calculation that the Israelis made. I think the first line of defense that the Iranians always had against this was never their air defenses, but was their axis of resistance proxies. So when the Israelis were able to decapitate and assassinate Hassan Nasrallah, They were able to carry out some sophisticated infiltration techniques like the pager attack inside Lebanon. They were able to degrade substantial portions of Houthi military infrastructure backed by the U.S. strikes later on. The Israelis felt emboldened. They felt that Iran is not able to meaningfully retaliate against them, that their air defense cover is bulletproof, and that now that the axis of resistance is gone and that shield of offensive retaliation has been removed, we can now drill down and go in and attack the uranium enrichment facilities. So I don't think that these attacks would have been possible without the assassination of Nasrallah and some of the degradation of the Houthi infrastructure that we saw before. So that's what I think this is largely linked to. I think that right now it's aimed at basically putting maximum pressure on Iran so that they capitulate in the talks, and also to steer the Americans away from accepting any level of uranium enrichment. I think the Steve Witkoff's comments about allowing 2.45%, which were rejected by other members of the Trump administration, were seen as even too much for the Israelis. And that's why the Israelis felt compelled to attack, and they felt that they could subvert Iran from within by bringing missile shipments in, carrying out operations inside Iranian territory. And it's a little bit like what the Ukrainians did with Spiderweb, right? Like they got emboldened by these kind of successful corporate actions. They decided to push the boundary as far as possible.
Ellie, Israel has shown us just in the last year and a half, that when they perceive an enemy to be weakened, when they think that the shield is down, they will strike, and they will not stop until they are happy with the results. And we saw that with Hezbollah, and they kept hitting. We saw that in Syria. They felt that Syria was defenseless, and they kept hitting, and they still are, Syrian military targets. Obviously, we're seeing that in Gaza. Do you expect Israel to apply the same kind of thinking, military thinking, to Iran now?
From what we're seeing, the answer is yes. I mean, we are dealing with a Israel 2.0, where the old rules of the game of deterrence really do not apply. Israel has had total almost freedom of action in the Levant region. And tactically, as I said, these are gaining Israel great successes from a military standpoint. But Israel has opened up a front now with Lebanon, with Syria. Look at where it is in Gaza. These are with non-state actors. We're talking now about Iran, which is a major state, a population of almost 90 million. What is the end state? If Israel is looking at a multi-waved, prolonged series of attacks, including assassination of major military figures, perhaps next waves may include political figures. I think there's a big question mark being asked also in the GCC states of what is Israel really after? Is it to weaken Iran's nuclear program? Is it to get Iran to negotiate really for a breakthrough with the United States? Or is it frankly just about regime instability, taking out another major player out of the chess game of the Middle East equation for Israel?
Ali, so Iran has to decide what it does now. Okay, as we understand it, as we record this program, the understanding is that Iran sent drones that were mostly, if not altogether, intercepted before they even reached Israeli airspace. That was probably not the extent of Iran's response. We don't think so, at least. What do you think? What are the avenues for Iran to respond here?
Look, the reality is that Iran doesn't have any good options available to it. If it doesn't respond and decides to pursue a de-escalatory trajectory, something along the lines that President Trump is expecting, I think mistakenly, that Israeli strike basically would modify Iran to come to the negotiating table and make concessions that it was previously reluctant to do. So that's one option, but it's very unlikely because, if the Iranians don't respond to this strike, it basically sets a precedent that this kind of attack on Iranian territory and assassination of senior leadership or elimination of the top military brass is all fair game. And that's a precedent that the Iranian regime, I'm sure, does not want to establish. The other side of this coin is that they know some of the things that Ellie and you were talking about before, which is this idea that Israel will continue to push the envelope unless it is stopped one way or another, or unless the cost increases in a way or externalized in a way that the U.S. would hold Israel back. That would require the Iranians to lash out with everything that they have in a way that it would basically scare the global economy and create so much chaos in the region that somebody would stop this escalatory cycle. But we don't know at this stage whether Iran actually has the ability to do so. I'm sure they're railing from the loss of some of the key military leaders. Israel clearly has deeply penetrated this system from an intelligence perspective. And we saw that Hezbollah's response to what Israel did to it fell way short of what people expected Hezbollah would be able to do. So it is possible that Iran, even if it wants to lash out, it might not be able to. But all of these are open questions. I mean, I remind everyone, we're only 12 hours into what might be a multi-day or a multi-week conflict.
Actually, this was going to be my next question. We're going to live with this story presumably for quite a while. So as our viewers, watch the news, read the headlines, I'd like you to give them maybe a little sense of how you read it and how you parse the words. Because when I look at the key players right now, whether it's Iran, whether it's Israel, even the US, everybody's coming out with these maximalist statements, right? Israel says we'll keep going as long as it takes to cripple the nuclear program. Iran says we're going to punish Israel. This will not remain unpunished. Trump is saying the next strike by Israel is going to be far worse. So if you look at this, it sounds like Armageddon. But we know there's also messaging and face saving. There are layers there to how you read these public statements. How do you read them?
Well, we are in uncharted territory. We have never had in the past 46 years since the Islamic Revolution in Iran this degree of direct confrontation between Iran and Israel and this degree of uncertainty. So it's really hard to predict. But I think we can be open to the mistake of underestimating the risks at this moment and thinking that these tensions could be contained in the way that the two confrontations between Iran and Israel were in 2024 in April and October of last year. But we can also be exaggerating what could happen next, which is the risk of regional conflagration. We've seen so far that, for instance, Hezbollah appears more reluctant to enter into the fray. But the Houthis seem to be much more enthusiastic about jumping into the fray. What the groups in Iraq would do is also an open question. How much of Iran's offensive capabilities remain intact and how much of it Iran would be willing to use against civilian centers in Israel remains an open question. If there are fatalities in Iranian retaliation, including American fatalities in Israel, I remind everyone there are 700,000 Americans who live in Israel. Then the U.S. might be sucked into this conflict. So there are lots of open questions and uncertainties, and that is why I think it is in the interest of everyone, all the key actors and the regional players as well, to pull the plug now, because if this continues, it can easily spiral out of control.
Ellie, for now, negotiations seem to be off the table. I don't know what happens next, but there were supposed to be negotiations on Sunday, sixth round of talks between the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and the Iranian delegation. Unless something changes, that's no longer happening.
Well, to my understanding, the Iranians have already announced that under the current conditions, they will not be going to the Omani-mediated talks. These attacks came 48 hours before Mr. Witkoff was meant to meet the Iranian foreign minister, potentially for some sort of a breakthrough on an interim agreement. This was something that, by the way, almost all the GCC states were supportive of. If you look at the condemnations, the most strongly worded condemnations right now are coming from the Arab world, I think, who fully understand that if things get out of hand, the entire region suffers, the geoeconomic vision for the entire region also suffers. And so there is now a real necessity to push both Washington and Tehran to preserve the diplomatic pathway, even if there might be a hiatus now while Israel and Iran carry out this military confrontation against one another.
Samuel, what is the pressure, the actual military threat that Iran can bring to bear on Israel? I ask you this because a few months ago, late in 2024, when last time Iran said, we're going to retaliate against Israel, and it sent dozens, if not more, ballistic missiles, various types of missiles, on Tel Aviv. The pictures were very impressive, but the consensus that built up in the hours and days that followed that Iranian attack on Israel was that it hadn't actually been very dangerous for Israel.
Yes, I mean, that's the risk that the Iranians have, right? I mean, they can do drone swarms, they can do missile swarms, but the Arab countries definitely are condemning the attack on Iran. But will those condemnations actually lead to them dissociating themselves from providing any kind of air defense support for Israel in the event of an Iranian retaliation? What we saw in the early hours here is that Jordan and the Israelis likely coordinated in terms of diffusing the threat, and other Arab countries are likely to follow suit. So I think that there is a bit of a disconnect there. And moreover, the Iranians really don't have a major power that can externally back them like the Israelis have in a qualified way with the United States. I mean, the Russians have rushed in order to express solidarity with the Iranians. They've condemned the Israeli strikes, much like the way they used to condemn the Israeli strikes in Syria when Bashar al-Assad was in power. But the Russians don't really have much to offer the Iranians right now, in terms of deterrence. Their air defenses are extremely overstretched already in the war in Ukraine, and they're having difficulties guarding their own strategic bombers, let alone being able to guard Iranian nuclear facilities. They may be able to do something and help with Bushehr a little bit in terms of fortifying and safeguarding that, but even with all their 30 years of cooperation there, is not guaranteed. So Iran is kind of standing alone against Israel and needs to make the most of its resources. I just don't know how Iran will be able to retaliate in a way that actually credibly deters Israel or inflicts enough cost on Israel that Israel decides to back off from military action.
Ellie, real quick, and I think this is going to be the last question because we have just under a minute left at this point. Samuel mentioned that Iran was basically solo in terms of not having much backing, right? Or if any backing, substantive backing, whereas Israel has the U.S. behind it. Now, the U.S. has said we were not involved in these strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. We will, however, in the last few moments, Donald Trump has confirmed what we expected he'd say. We will, however, defend Israel. Trump has his hands on the steering wheel here. How do you expect him to turn the wheel?
So look, my sense is that there will be a stronger than what we've seen in terms of the drone strikes attack inside Israel. The US is expected, as you said, to provide defensive capabilities. The big question is if Iran and the US end up in an open confrontation with each other. If, for example, in the future responses, if the Israeli strikes continue and Iran feels the need to respond, Iran pivots to targeting US military bases and personnel, which I don't foresee that it will do in this first round of retaliation. And then the US president will be in a situation which he promised his base when he was campaigning he would keep the US out of the so-called endless war, that he will be in a position where, again, just like in Yemen, he will have to make a decision to dedicate considerable military resources to a new front with Iran that doesn't really have an endpoint. Okay. So I think President Trump, just like Iran, has a choice on whether there is a greater space to make concessions or if he's going to maintain a maximalist position on this issue of enrichment, which is really why we have hit a dead end at this point on the negotiations.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for their insights, Ellie, Garan, Ali Vaez, and Samuel Romani. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X, our handle, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.